guys, welcome to the Pew. We're so excited you're with us today. My name's Brooke and I'm one of the counselors here.
Hey everybody, I'm Nicole. I'm one of the counselors here as well.
I'm Ray Morgan. I'm also a counselor. Good to have you guys.
And I'm Stacy, a counselor at Court of Three. I'm happy to be here today.
So today we're going to begin, we're going to pick up from where we left off last time and just discuss some more things with communication and skills for communication and how you can be better at it. And here's the deal. You never stop. It's not like Mount Everest where you reach the top and there is no more. It is a ongoing, continuous process of working to communicate in a healthy, effective way.
So I think last time Ray led the conversation on a good verbal skill of using I messages. And so I think today we're going to talk a little bit more verbal, but a little bit nonverbal too when we start talking about different types of how we communicate. Some people communicate more passively, passive aggressively, and then our goal for everyone is as much as possible to be assertive in how we speak. Like Brooke was saying, we're not perfect. We're not going to do everything. You're not just going to arrive and be an assertive communicator, but we all can make improvements to get there in every relationship in our life. So I'll kind of do y'all want me to jump in and start some, ladies?
Go for it.
Okay. So I think one of the things with once we're using I statements too, as you see, I'm a hand talker. So for me, that's one thing to be aware of when we are communicating with someone else. Someone might find that a little bit more aggressive at times, and I can tend to lean more towards aggressive speech because I get excited and I can be all la, la, la. So I think too, tip one is know your audience too. When I'm talking with my girlfriends and we're having fun, they don't think anything about hand movements. If I'm talking with my boss or my husband, depending on what we're talking about, I might need to be more aware of that, of how they will receive that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So, and I also think step two, I can't remember, Brooke just said that, but also just our tone of when we're talking to somebody too, depending on the conversation. I think always reflecting on ourselves of what are we feeling when we begin to feel escalated, angry, anxious, we can immediately, our tone can start going up, it can start coming across more forceful. Or if we feel we're not being heard, we can start getting louder. We might start going into the yelling range, or you might be someone that's a passive communicator, or the opposite, and you might start shutting down and withdrawing, and you don't really know what to say.
Most definitely. So my 3-year-old has the patience of a 3-year-old, and if I don't respond in a nanosecond, he begins to get louder. Mama, want me out, Mama. And it just gets higher and higher as he goes. And so that's something that as we, get older and communicate more and more with others, we have to be aware of. I'm a loud communicator when everything's going well. And so one of the first things I had to learn when I was entering into being a counselor and therapy is I have to talk a lot softer than is normal for me. So just being aware that in my family, kind of like what Nicole said, when I'm with my family, we're all loud. So it's okay, we're loud, we're doing our thing, right? But then I have to realize when I'm in different crowds or around different people that I may need to talk softer because that can be perceived differently than what is my norm at home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a hand talker too, like Nicole, but I get loud when I get excited about something or I'm feeling passionate about something. And then my children are like, why are you yelling? And I don't even realize I've done it. Now, if it's in a safe space where we're just talking about, whatever, sports or what have you, then it's okay. But when I'm feeling frustrated and I get loud, then that conveys a whole nother message to my children or to my husband. And so I have to be really mindful of that when I'm getting frustrated. Like, what is my volume? Where am I?
So yes, the context of the conversation has so much to do with your tone of voice, right? So I can be kind of sarcastic and playing with my husband. And if it's a normal day and a good thing, then that's great. But if there's been tense moments, it can be taken a totally different than typical, right? So our tone and how we handle things, we have to be very intelligent of the situation and the environment and the setting, and just being mindful of that as we're walking around. What kind of situation am I entering into?
For sure.
Me.
So recognizing your tone, recognizing non-verbally what you might be doing with the person that you're talking to. And Brooke just alluded to this. Also knowing the audience of like what time of day may be best to have a conversation. If you're trying to come at me at 7:30 in the morning and have a conversation, 99% chance it's not gonna go well. I'm barely a human at that point, and you've gotta give me some time to have coffee, have a little biscuit, just really, like, sink in to who I am in the morning. And so I know, and I try to communicate that with my friends, my husband, at work, really try to talk to me after 9. Like 9 to 2 is a good time. And he's the same way. When my husband gets home from work, that first hour he needs to decompress. I don't need to come to him with anything. He's just trying to get out of work mode. So just knowing the person that you need to have a conversation with and when they would receive that too.
Yes. Yes, because I'm at the
I-
opposite end. I'm a late night, you come at me, I'm gonna be mad. It doesn't matter what you come at me with, I'm mad, like I'm ready to go to bed. Don't hit me with this, right? So it's good to communicate that with the people that you talk to and communicate with a lot. Look, I'm not a late night person. You know, I'd love to help you or talk to you or listen to what you have to say, but please after 9 p.m. or whatever time, I'm not good for anything then. Or, you know, if you're not a morning person, communicating that, but also knowing that about the people that you're closest to in your life.
For sure. And I think it's okay if it's not an emergency thing to even conversate and say, can we put a pin in this maybe till Saturday or Sunday or Friday night? We're super slammed this week with the kids and church. So it's okay just to lay that boundary down too and come back to it later.
And one of the things that I want to add to that, Nicole, is it's really important to respect that boundary too when your spouse or whoever asks for that. I think we've talked about before how especially if you're like in an emotionally charged conversation, if you get to that point where your brain flips the lid, or basically you're out of your thinking brain and into your emotional brain, there is no amount of words that we can do to reason with someone who is in that emotional brain. And science says it takes about 20 minutes for that emotional brain to calm down. So I think it's really important when somebody says, listen, I do not have it inside of me to have this conversation right now. Instead of pushing that, because we live in a society where people's like, no, I want it now. I want to have this conversation now. I want to go to bed and I don't want to deal with this tomorrow. I think it's really important to respect that boundary and realize that if you come at it at a time when everybody's not exhausted or not stressed, trying to meet a deadline or things like that. I've learned in my family, um, everybody in my family wants to talk when I am stressed trying to meet a deadline. And I'm like, listen, I had all day yesterday that I was just chilling. And today I have got to get this done within the next hour and you all want to talk. Um, so just being mindful that when somebody says, let's talk about this later, it's not a rejection. It's not an avoidance saying, I don't want to talk about this and we're just going to pretend it didn't happen. It's giving the person space to come at it with a healthy and calm perspective rather than exhausted and irritable and something that could just escalate into a problem that didn't even have to be a problem in the first place.
That's one of the things I've seen in working with couples is that a lot of times there's one that wants to deal with it now and there's one that doesn't, that needs to process and think it through. And so being able to develop compromise in those situations, like, can we talk about this later? Right now I'm feeling overwhelmed with some other things or what have you, or I just haven't woken up yet because I need at least one cup of coffee in me before I can have any type of reasonable conversation. And my husband knows this. So on Saturdays, we sit there quietly drinking our coffee and doing, or playing solitaire, crossword puzzle, and on our phone. And then I can begin talking about what are we going to do today? But if he comes at me first thing when I woke up, what are we doing today? That conversation is not going to go well. And so, yeah, definitely being respectful of your spouse, but also coming back to that issue because it's obviously an important one. And sometimes it just kind of gets swept under the rug. And then it comes out at an untimely, when you're fussing about something, well, we never talked about this. And it might have been 2 weeks, 2 months, whatever ago. And so making sure that we're talking about things as we're dealing with them is really, really important piece to communication.
So this is a kind of a silly factual piece of information, but I think it really drills down the point of when we're in our emotional brain and somebody is trying to have a rational conversation with us, our IQ is that of a rhesus monkey. So we're literally thinking in fight, flight, or freeze mode. Like we're not thinking with the frontal cortex, making logical, rational decisions, and conversing well. So when I realized that like we're totally not thinking at all, really, it helped me to respect and realize, okay, I need time to cool off, or this person needs time to cool off. Let's get back to it in 20 or 30 minutes, or the next day at a good time, or whatever, right? Don't, just like Ray said, don't drop it, but also realizing right now we will accomplish nothing good. We'll create more problems than we'll accomplish any good.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, another encouragement is when you're dealing with an issue, stick with that issue, right? So let's say I'm communicating with my husband on transporting children to school and sports and practice and church and all these things, right? And we begin to have somewhat of a disagreement, or it's a kind of a hard problem for us to come to a resolution on, whatever it may be. Stick to that topic. When you go back to a previous problem or something you were upset with them about and add that into the conversation, it's just going to spiral out of control and you're not going to get anywhere good, right? So when you're dealing with a topic, stick with that topic. Don't add in other topics or other issues or something you were mad about last week. Stick with the topic, because when you do that, it totally derails the conversation and nothing good can really come of it.
For sure. And like Brooke was saying too, I feel like a good tip for me, internal awareness, is when that other person starts to feel like the enemy or the opponent, then we need to take a breath. We need to take a break. We need to just process kind of some of those emotions that are coming up, because that's when we begin to derail the conversation. So anytime that person, we no longer feel like we're a team and we can't find a solution, maybe take a breather and just, okay, let's put a pin in this.
Absolutely. And I know we talk a lot about couples because a lot of times that's where we see that's the person we're the most comfortable with. That's where we see the most conflict and the need for conflict resolution. But we can have conflict in any relationship. It can be a coworker, it could be a family member, it could be anyone. And so just being mindful of how do I need to handle this the best way, and just communicating with that person what you're feeling. And knowing that sometimes, even when we say all the right things and we do it all the right way, that person still might get upset. And that is okay. And what happens, what I see sometimes is we might be trying to have a calm conversation with someone about we're feeling hurt because of a certain situation. And then, well, you did this. And so they want to shift that blame to something that I did last week or a year ago or whenever. And that's okay to talk about. But right now, we're going to discuss this. And if you want to talk about that, yeah, we can definitely talk about that later. But we have to be careful. And my grandmother had a saying, You do not have to attend every argument you're invited to. And so just being mindful that sometimes you can be baited into an argument. Teenagers are excellent at this. And so just knowing, wait a minute, I'm not going to get sucked into a power struggle with my child. I'm not going to get sucked into a debate about who did what when. Keeping it on topic, and then having that time, allowing that person the opportunity to discuss what's on their mind too.
Yes, I smile because I can relate already with my kids. Like, one, don't hit David Gray when he wakes up with a bunch of questions, right? Like, just don't hit him with it. Leave him alone. Let him do his thing, right? And so, yes, it applies to our children. It applies to friendships. I walked in Nicole's office and I could see the look on her face, like I'm into something right now. I don't want to talk, right? So just being respectful and being mindful of that with other people. My Eli, my oldest, will be like, well, Mom, you did make Titus do this. And I'm like, well, he's 3, but it's also being careful not to be baited into arguments. And it's with any relationship. It's with coworkers, it's with, or being mindful, not necessarily baited, but it's with coworkers, it's with your children, it's with your parents, it's with everything. Just kind of trying to be mindful and aware of those things.
Another aspect for us to remember when communicating with our children is we are modeling communication for them. So how we speak to our children and how we interact with them is going to determine how they interact with others. And then one of the things too, even most recently, that the Lord's been dealing with me about is how they see me treat their dad sends a message to my son about this is how you should be treated in a marriage. And then when I stop and look in the mirror, I'm like, okay, Stacey, do you want your son to be treated like this? And that makes me be more aware of how am I talking to my husband and how am I showing respect, or what are some areas that I need to be more mindful and let God do some softening of the edges there. So that's really important. And then too, with your daughters, it's just like we are to train them to be godly women, and how we communicate with them is part of that training. So it's easy for us to get focused on the adults in our lives and communication, but it works with our children too. And not only for us to have healthy communication so we can have healthy relationships, but just remember that that's part of the training that we're doing.
I
Yes.
agree.
Go ahead.
Well, and I've worked with couples who either the husband or the wife tends to, and this goes back to what we were talking about a little bit a minute ago, they tend to yell when they get angry and upset. And it might be the husband, it might be the wife. And it might be because of the house that they grew up in. This was what was modeled for them, and they don't see anything wrong with it. They don't see it as disrespectful whatsoever. It is okay for me to yell at my wife when I'm upset with her. The question I pose to couples is, if you and your wife were sitting in a restaurant and a stranger came in and started yelling at your wife, would that be okay? What about your child? Your child starts yelling at your wife. Is that okay? And more often than not, they're like, no. Then why is it okay for you to treat your spouse, your husband, or your wife that way when we are called to love our spouse? And that is not a loving way to communicate. That's one of it breaks my heart, frankly, to see that. Because if it's something that's not dealt with, it can turn into verbal abuse. And so we definitely want to avoid that. And that's not an example we want to set for our children either.
Right. It's as simple as do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? I don't want somebody yelling at me, so I don't need to be yelling at them. And even if you grew up in a home where there was yelling, like you said, and you find yourself that you did yell, so every day is a new day, and you can keep working on that. And with time, it does get better. Habits are hard to break, so don't beat yourself up, but begin to work on, okay, this is not who I want to be, or this is not how I want my kids to communicate. or want other people to communicate to my kids. So just every day working on that, being mindful of it, trying to make those changes, and just realizing, do I want to be talked to that way? And if not, trying to treat that person the way you desire to be talked to, is a good one, I think, a good kind of rule to keep in your mind.
Right, just building that awareness, like we said, of, a lot of these tips are to help people be more assertive. And I think too, being able to reflect to start with of how do I normally communicate? And we might communicate a little differently in different areas of our life. But if we're a passive communicator, the focus most of the time is solely on the other person. And so if you do see that you're more of a people pleaser, you stay quiet, I'll do whatever you want to do. Maybe a tip of recognizing, what am I feeling? What is my need in this situation? What do I desire? And then maybe you are more of that aggressive communicator. So that focus most of the time is on you. So learning how to take a breath and say, how does this affect the other person involved in this communication? And the goal to be assertive is always being able to directly communicate what you're feeling with the other person always in mind too. So being able to have that clear, fluid back and to between the person or the group of people you're talking to.
I think Stephen Covey talks about this in the 7 Habits of the Highly Effective Person, to seek first, to understand, then to be understood. Someone is more likely to listen to you if you hear them out first. And so being able to come to them and say, hey, what's going on? Because scripture tells us we are to be slow to anger and quick to listen. And so I think when we recognize that it's not just about body language, tone, words, hand gestures, it's also about listening. That's one of the most important keys to communication.
Yes, listen to understand, not listening to respond. Those are two different things, right? Listen to understand, not to just respond. And I think that's a big thing for everybody to work on. But then I had another thought. Also, the goal of communication should not be to win. And if that's the goal of communicating, it's not going to be good, right? The goal of communication is for the relationship. And loving or caring for each other, depending on the type of relationship, and trying to work through something together. So it's for the good of the relationship, for the good of the other person, for maybe if it's for you to try to make things healthy for you, but the goal is not to win, but to find resolution or whatever is going on in that relationship. It's for the relationship and you and the other person, not to win.
Well, and I think too, it's also important to recognize who we're communicating with, like male or female. Men use, I think on average, a third of the words that women use. Shocker. They do, because men communicate to exchange information. That's one of the main goals for their communication. I'm not trying to use sweeping generalizations, because some men are different. And some women are more quiet. Women, though, communicate to build relationship. That is an important key for women in order to develop healthy relationships. And so just kind of recognizing, I learned this when I was dating my husband, because he would call and say, hey, this is the joke. Hey, what are you doing? And I would talk for an hour, and then he'd be like, okay, talk to you tomorrow. And that was the end of the conversation. But there were times like when he would be really quiet, and I would think something was wrong. What's wrong? You're not talking. Why aren't you talking? Because if he were a girlfriend who was being all of a sudden really quiet, that would be a really clear indication. Okay, something's going on with her. Something's wrong. And so when we talk about communicating with men and women, one of the things I like to tell clients about is the emotionally charged question. Women need to avoid those emotionally charged questions. And the perfect example that I use, I tell clients this a lot, is where have you been? Your husband is late. He's supposed to be home from work at 5:30. It's 6:15. He's not home. You've called him. It's going straight to voicemail, and you're worried. And so he pulls up, and where have you been? Now, we're communicating that out of concern,
Mhm.
not frustration. But he hears that and he takes it as an accusation. What have you been doing? Have you been, at the bar? Have you been hanging out with some woman? Like, what are you doing? Now, if the four of us were meeting for coffee and let's say Nicole was late and she walks in and we're like, Nicole, where have you been? Oh my goodness, let me tell you what happened to me on the way here. And she would go into a fantastical story about how she got pulled over for speeding, or whatever. Yay. And so, as girlfriends, we can communicate that way, but we do need to be really mindful of the things that we say to the men in our life and how that can come across. And that's a really important key to avoiding arguments.
Always and never are also words you typically want to avoid, right? You're always late coming home. You never come straight home from work, right? Very rarely can we ever say always and never about anything, right? Especially when humans are concerned. So just avoiding those words altogether in conversation if you can at all possible.
I never say always,
I said,
never.
keep
Never
always
say
and
it,
never
never.
for Jesus.
Huh?
I
I
said,
like
keep always and never for Jesus.
That's right. Yes,
Right.
that's a session. That's really who you can reserve that for. He will never forsake you. But yeah, avoiding those words with people in our lives when we're trying to have a discussion. All right. Well, I think we have covered a lot today for you guys to digest and to think on. Don't try everything all at one time. We say this a lot, but pick one. Just pick one. And work on that one. And if you work on that one, that is improvement, right? And so just pick one area and begin to work on communication in your life. And we will pick up where we left off next time.
Well, and I think maybe something good is to go to somebody you feel safe with, either like your best friend or your spouse, and say, what are some ways that I can communicate better? Because it is something we can all get better at. And so it might be, I appreciate it when you put your phone down. We talked a little bit about that last time. When I'm talking to you, or, I like it when you look at me, when I'm talking to you. And so being able to discover some of those things that we can work on, or maybe ask them, tell me one thing I can do better, because otherwise we might, get a little overwhelmed and discouraged. So
Mhm. So we hope this is helpful for you. We encourage you, thank you, Ray, to just work on that one thing with one person in your life. And if you've mastered that, again, we won't totally master it, but if you get really good at that, you can move on to another thing or another person and working on something with them. This is just a skill that you can always be practicing and growing with in your life. But we thank you for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed it and it's helpful. If you want us to talk about a topic, email us at thepew@cotcs.org. We look forward to that, and we hope you guys have a great day.
till next time.
Whoa!